Welcome, aspirants. Let's dive straight into a fascinating new study on India's forests. Now, this is an absolutely critical topic for your General Studies Paper 3, especially for questions around climate change and conservation. So let's break it down, shall we?
Absolutely. And we've structured this entire discussion to give you a really clear picture. We'll start with the study's, pretty surprising headline. Then we'll dig into the science behind it, look at the uneven impact across India, and most importantly, we'll talk about the critical caveats you must mention in your answers. And we'll wrap it all up by showing you exactly how to connect this to your exams.
Usually when we link climate change and forests, the story is, it's pretty grim. We think of degradation, of loss. But this study, it presents a very counterintuitive projection, and it's one that we need to look at very, very carefully.
So what did this study actually find? Well, it's a new modeling study coming from researchers at several top Indian institutes, and it was just published in the journal Environmental Research Climate.
Okay, so here's the headline that's making waves. The study projects that if we continue on our current path of high greenhouse gas emissions, India's forests could potentially store almost double the amount of carbon by the year 2100. Now, remember, this is based on what's known as a high-emissions, fossil fuel-intensive scenario.
And that key number to remember is a potential 97% increase. But here's the crucial part for your analysis. This is where the marks are. This is only under that high-emissions pathway. If we look at a low-emissions scenario, the projected increase is much, much smaller, only about 35%. That contrast is a vital point for any answer you write.
So the big question is, what's causing this? How can a high-emission scenario, something we always associate with negative impacts, possibly lead to more forest growth? The study points to two main forces that are interacting. First, you've got higher levels of CO2 in the atmosphere. This creates something called the CO2 fertilization effect. Think of it like extra food for plants, which boosts photosynthesis and also helps them use water more efficiently. And second, the model also projects higher rainfall across a lot of India. So quite simply, there's more moisture available for trees. You put those two together and you get a boost in vegetation.
Now, for the UPSC exam, a big national number is good, but a regionally differentiated analysis, that's what gets you the extra marks. And this projected growth is not uniform across India at all. This is where the study gets really interesting.
And what's truly fascinating here is where the biggest changes are projected to happen. The largest relative increases, we're talking over 60%, they're not in our traditional lush forest areas. They're actually in the drier, semi-arid zones of Rajasthan, Gujarat, and Madhya Pradesh. Why? Because these areas are highly sensitive to any increase in moisture. Meanwhile, our established ecosystems, like the Western Ghats and the Himalayas, they show smaller gains, likely because they're already closer to their natural saturation point.
And this brings us to what is arguably the most important part of our analysis, especially for your mains paper. It is very tempting to see this study and just call it good news, but that would be a very superficial reading. A good civil servant must look beyond the headlines and really understand the limitations.
That's so right. The researchers themselves are very clear that their model has limitations. It doesn't account for major real-world threats like deforestation, land being converted for other uses, wildfires, pest outbreaks, or extreme weather events like droughts and heat waves. Any of these could easily wipe out these projected gains.
And this quote from the lead author, Fatima Fitha, is the perfect line to use in your conclusion. It powerfully summarizes the core message. These projections, they are not a guarantee. They represent a potential that can only be realized if, and it's a big if, we protect our existing forests from these very real threats. So this study is not a license to be complacent.
Okay, so let's bring it all together now. How do you actually use this information in the exam hall? This is the so what part of our entire discussion.
Imagine you're faced with a question just like this one in your GS3 paper, or maybe even in the interview. A recent study projects a significant increase in India's forest carbon sink. How does this finding impact India's climate commitments and forestry policies? Critically analyze. How would you even begin to approach it?
So here's how you structure that perfect answer. First, always start with the context. You must connect this study to India's larger climate goals, specifically our Nationally Determined Contribution, or NDC, to create that carbon sink of 2.5 to 3 billion tons of CO2 equivalent.
Next up is your core analysis. You present the key finding, that big 97% projection, but you immediately balance it with all those critical caveats we talked about. This shows you have a nuanced understanding. And for some extra marks, you could even contrast the model's projections with on-ground data from the Forest Survey of India, the FSI.
And for your conclusion, you argue that this study doesn't suggest complacency at all. In fact, it reinforces the need for smarter, region-specific conservation. For example, knowing that semi-arid zones are so highly sensitive means we should probably target afforestation efforts there. A one-size-fits-all policy just won't work.
Exactly. The real takeaway here is that models, they can give us potential futures, but it's policy and action that determine our reality. So the final question isn't what the climate will do to our forests, but what we will do for them. Remember that critical lens. All the best.